AGRION.
Hi everyone, my name is David Guilford. I'm a Vice President at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today on behalf of our President, Kyle Kimball. Before we get into the panel, I want to set the stage in terms of why this is important to us from an economic development perspective. New York City has had sustainability goals for a very long time, but under the current leadership of Mayor de Blasio, just a few weeks ago, we launched something called One NYC, which is taking the sustainability objectives of Plan YC and greener, greater buildings and all of the initiatives that you're likely very familiar with, and looking at this through an expanded lens that's looking at the linkages between sustainability, resiliency, growth, and equity. So in our role at EDC, our fundamental objective is to create economic opportunity across the city, and that's both in terms of helping companies grow and also making sure that individuals and small businesses are operating in an environment with that has a high quality of life, low operating costs, and so forth. And for each of these objectives, there is a tie to distributed energy resources. And that's why it's really great to have this panel discussion this morning. As you probably know, last September, Mayor de Blasio announced that the city would reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. And that's really one of the most ambitious policy goals in this set by a city from that perspective. And that's going to require a lot of action, both on the public sector and in partnership with the private sector. We've made a lot of progress already, achieving a 19% reduction from our 2005 baseline. But some of the issues that we face include affordability, meaning that the high energy prices that we face here disproportionately burden some of our lowest income communities. Our average price for residential electricity is 29 cents per kilowatt hour, according to the EIA, and that's 2.4 times greater than the national average. At the same time, we're seeing renewable energy prices falling substantially, which creates a great opportunity. The other angle that I hope we'll get to in this discussion is about the need for resiliency in New York City. As we all know, Hurricane Sandy created a lot of physical destruction and damage across the city, but it also had about $19 billion in economic damage. And a lot of that was due to power loss and the outages that in some neighborhoods lasted for weeks. This touched on things from hospitals and urgent care facilities to shelters and sort of the emergency management side of things. There's a lot of work going on in this. I know that some of the panelists here today are at the forefront of this. So before we get into an open discussion, and I hope most of the time here will be questions, and I know there are microphones throughout the table, I would like to give each of our panelists the opportunity to provide a brief introduction to both to themselves and to their organization. So to start with, on my left is Emily Dean. Emily is the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Energy Policy and Program Implementation at the New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services, or DCAS. She oversees strategy and implementation of energy efficiency programs throughout the city's 4,000 plus buildings. There's a lot more I could say about Emily. We've worked together on a number of different initiatives, but we'll get into that during the discussion. So for now, I'll turn things over to Emily.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Emily Dean from New York City DCAS, Energy Management. In case you don't know DCAS, it's really the back office for city government operations. So we support agencies in carrying out their mission serving the public. And DCAS Energy Management has two key functions. One is to develop the energy budget with OMB and ensure that city buildings have electricity, gas, steam, all the utilities they need and pay for those. That's roughly an $800 million annual budget. On the demand side, we are leading the implementation of One City Built to Last, driving towards an interim goal of 35% reduction in city government operations by 2025, and driving towards 80% reduction by 2050. So I'll go over a few of our programs on the demand side. I hope you can all see this. This is just an overview of our different programs that we offer to city agencies to stimulate DER deployment. And we take a very broad definition of DER, so that includes energy efficiency, demand response, DG, storage, really whatever is most cost effective in reducing the city's carbon footprint. So on the left is our ACE program. ACE stands for Accelerated Conservation and Efficiency. And it is a competitive funding program where agencies apply to us for needs that they have to support their own energy priorities in their buildings. We award funding on a competitive basis, largely driven by cost effectiveness of greenhouse gas reductions. But also we look at what are the resiliency benefits of these projects, where are they located, what are the equity benefits and implications of this, cost savings, education, et cetera. So that all goes into the methodology for allocating funds in the most cost competitive way. Specifically, we're actually looking at, in the next round, prioritizing certain funding for Con Ed's Brooklyn Queens Demand Management Program as a way to move that initiative forward and support load reductions in that zone. Moving to the right, deep energy retrofits. This is a critical part of our ability to hit 35% reduction by 2025, and this will require a change from our previous approach of sort of looking at energy conservation measures, but more of a systems-based, a holistic approach to building efficiency, starting with our largest energy-consuming buildings, particularly critical facilities where cogeneration or distributed generation or storage can be an option. So that is a program that is in development. We also have a very ambitious goal for clean energy and particularly renewable energy. In One City Built to Last, Mayor de Blasio set a goal for city government to install 100 megawatts of solar by 2025. So that is an ambitious goal, and we will achieve that by a mix of capital installations as well as leveraging solar PPAs. Moving to the right, our IDEA program, Innovative Demonstrations for Energy Adaptability. This is our emerging technology demonstration program where we partner with companies that have emerging or underutilized energy technologies that match the needs of facility managers and problems that need to be solved in our buildings. Demonstrate them, go through a measurement verification process to understand the energy impacts, and where successful, deploy them across our portfolio. The first round, the first phase of IDEA focused on building controls, including plug, load, and demand management. And phase 2 is looking at energy storage, and I'll get to that in a minute. And finally, demand response is a crucial part of our program as well. The supply side of our office engages all city agencies in enrolling in NISO and other demand or other revenue generating programs for the city. The goal for this summer is to hit 50 megawatt reduction, which is about 5% of city government's overall electric peak. So just a quick spotlight on IDEA phase 2. We chose energy storage because we see a lot happening there, and being DCAS, we love bureaucracy, so we're going to take it on. It's our favorite thing, solving problems and working through it. So we're happy to be one of the guinea pigs, certainly not the first. EDC has their own BAT project, which hopefully will be talked about today. But we're looking at a few chemistries that have not been deployed in New York City. There are 3 projects underway. They're going to be kicking off this summer. One is hoping to pair with renewables, with the solar installation as well. So that'll be a learning experience for us, and we're really excited to share what the process is we're going through and ultimately drive towards a more streamlined process for energy storage. So that's it.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Our next panelist is Colin Galt with Smarter Grid Solutions. He's been with Smarter Grid Solutions for 6 years, including moving to New York City from Scotland, which is where the company is headquartered, to establish the first office in North America, which was at the Urban Future Lab, which is a partnership between EDC and New York University. So it's a great pleasure to have Colin here today because he is currently responsible for new products and business development, the company's active network management. So he has a unique perspective on some of the opportunities and challenges for distributed energy resources. So Colin?
Everyone hear me okay? So hi, my name is Colin Galt. I'm the principal consultant at Smarter Grid Solutions here in New York City. So thanks, David. I moved here in 2013 from Scotland. The company formed in 2008 and I joined in 2009, so I've been there from almost the beginning. We are a university startup. The technology that we have patented was developed at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. The purpose of creating this new technology, which we call active network management, was to better manage and control distributed energy resources connecting to the grid, so that when you integrate them, you can use them to avoid any issues that they would normally cause. So if they were going to cause high voltage or overloads any of the circuits, if you were to manage and control these resources, monitoring the grid in real time, actively controlling resources, you could increase the hosting capacity of the grid itself, get more generation on, which benefits anyone wanting to develop distributed generation. So a couple of examples, projects that we've done. So most of our work has been in the UK, where we started off. Our first project was the Orkney Isles in Scotland. So this was a group of islands off the west coast of Scotland, or sorry, the east coast of Scotland. Don't tell anyone in Scotland I said that. So they have a massive wind resource, and by the time we came along to look at this group of islands, they already had 40 megawatts of wind on this island. The island has a peak demand of 35 megawatts, so you can imagine stressing the network. But given it's such a great resource for wind generation, lots of the local communities wanted to put in community wind schemes. And those turbines themselves were small in size. Well, they were 1 megawatt turbines typically, which meant that they couldn't afford the high cost of interconnection that would have been a barrier to their project. Adding extra wind at that point was going to have to result in a third subsea cable to those islands, which was cost prohibitive. Our technology was developed to manage any new connection to that island so that it didn't cause the problems that was resulting in this need for a third subsea cable. Effectively, at times, you could overload the two existing cables that connected the islands to the Scottish mainland. So what we do now on those islands, when generators connect, they are controlled in real time based on the power flowing through the existing subsea cables. There's communication from measurement at those cables back to our control system that we've deployed on the island, calculates the available capacity, and then issues signals out to all of those generators that are connected through our active network management scheme. This has allowed an extra, let's get the numbers right, 24 megawatts of new generation and avoided pounds of costs of interconnection to all of those generators. So that's a saving for the utility and also a saving for all those generation schemes that wanted to connect. So that was in 2009 we started that as the grid. It was developed with Scottish and Southern Energy, who are one of our original investors. And then in a flexible plug-and-play project with UK Power Networks, we adopted the same technology, the same techniques, and in that area we were saving generators between 75 and 90% of the interconnection costs. We did a study with our technology with the utility, and they also looked at what they would have done as the alternative, which is their traditional approach would be to upgrade the network, paired it with active network management. Generators were being managed, which meant at times they would be curtailed, but it's so infrequent that they would maybe reduce their potential energy yield by 2 to 3%, but their savings on the interconnection costs were 75 to 90%, and value terms that was coming out at £1 million for some of those generators they were saving on their interconnection costs by accepting at times they would be curtailed, but they would still have a 90%, 95% energy yield from what they were expecting with this little bit of curtailment. So they made that work for them. They were actually happy to see that come about, have an alternative to the traditional approach. And in our other project in the UK, this time it was in London. So to apply this to an urban setting, the Orkney Isles and the flexible plug and play project were in rural areas with high wind resource. In London, we applied the exact same technology, the exact same techniques to manage the grid, monitoring it in real time, calculating capacity, sending signals to distributed generators. We were using it more for demand response. So it wasn't the generators causing the problem, it was high demand. We were measuring points on the grid and instructing generators to generate more, or even if they were off, to come online and help solve those problems. And so doing that, UK Power Networks have estimated that over the next 5 years they're going to save about £40 million on their infrastructure costs by avoiding and deferring these infrastructure upgrades, because they now have, firstly, more visibility of distributed generation and can actually rely on it because they know that they can see when it's there and when it's operating, factor it into their planning, and at times they can have control over it. So in 2013, when we moved here to New York, we wanted to bring this technology to the States, to North America, and to try and adopt the same practice techniques and help generators connect in the same way as we've been doing in the UK. So to date, we've worked with Con Edison on a feasibility study looking at the integration of microgrids and distributed energy resources into New York City's grid. And we're also going to deploy our technology at NREL's test facility in Colorado. On that, we're going to look at 3 use cases. We're going to look at smart home, smart campus, and smart distribution networks, and trial out these same techniques in this test facility, which will allow us to try and look at use cases more specific to North America. Although grids are widely similar between the UK and the US, there are some nuances that you have to account for when you're setting up the... But yeah, so really happy to be here, happy to be in New York City, and hopefully we can have a good discussion today on distributed energy resources.
Thanks a lot, Colin. Next, we get to hear some of the utility perspective on this subject. So I'd like to introduce Jinjin Wang from Con Edison, who manages the Building Engineers Group that provides technical support for the implementation of all the energy efficiency programs. And she, in particular, is a technical advisor for the implementation of the demand management program with NYSERDA. So that I'll turn it over to Jinjin to offer her perspective on this issue. Thanks.
Thank you. So for those of you who are not familiar with our Con Edison programs, and I hope that's not true, I hope all of you are familiar with our programs, but we do offer energy efficiency programs, the traditional sense, reducing your energy consumption through lighting, through your HVAC, and anything that you can do to reduce consumption. And then we have demand management programs such as the DMP, which we launched a couple years ago. And then we also have targeted programs, which I think you guys are here to, and hopefully you are looking into BQDM. So today I'm going to go in detail on demand management and the BQDM programs to give you perspectives on the different types of needs that we have when most people are skeptical when you come to their doors and you want to give them money. They're like, you're Con Ed, why do you want to give me money to use less, right? So we do gain from it, so it's not purely selfless. So please just take our money and just reduce your energy, we mean it. So demand management program, I'm sure for those who, it's been a long time since we revisited this program, and I want to give you the background once again, what was the need, right? The need is the potential closure of the Indian Point Energy Center, IPEC, and that would result in a shortfall of 1450 megawatts to Manhattan, to our service territory. And most of that will be made up in transmission. It's already underway. But then the commission challenged us, Con Edison, to say, how can you help us reduce that carbon picture, right? What can you do in that short time, recognizing that 2 years is not a lot of time. So they said, what can you do for us? And we came up with a portfolio of 100 megawatts. And that is still hugely ambitious. And I don't know if you guys can relate, but your average light bulb at home is 40 watts, right? You're trying to reduce 100 megawatts in 2 years. How many of these household light bulbs would you have to remove to get to that level, right? It's immense. And considering that New York City, money is not always an issue. There's lots flowing, and to get these large projects in 2 years is difficult. But the main point in this is it's a system capacity issue, and that's what this program is driving at reducing. So in this program, we're looking for reduction between 2 to 6, and that's what we have identified as a coincident peak for our system. And especially when it comes to battery storage, when you're talking about chillers and stuff like that, once you reduce it, it's not a problem, right? You don't have to worry about what hours you're reducing, because generally your cooling load is coincident to our system peak. When you're talking about battery storage systems, that length of time of discharge from 2 to 6, that's not really a challenge anymore. There are technologies now that have advanced and have matured to produce that 4 to 6 hour reduction, continuous discharge. But the problem is making the economic sense for the customers to reduce their peak from 2 to 6. It's good for Con Edison, but it might not necessarily give you the payback necessary, as we're realizing once we launch this program when it comes to energy storage. Hopefully everyone knows this. This is our incentives for the demand management program, and of particular interest to today's discussion is the $2,100 per kW for the battery. And again, this is only for systems that would give us a continuous discharge between 2 to 6 p.m. And that's certainly a challenge for lots of large commercial customers. One, their peak is longer than 4 hours, and two, is not necessarily between 2 to 6. And so to encourage larger projects and deep dives, we've created this bonus for projects that are 500 kW or above, or you get an additional 10%. And then, so all of these incentives are capped at 50%. But if you can hit these larger project numbers, we can give you an additional 10 or 15% on top of that bonus, and that's above that 50%. So BQDM, for those who are not too familiar with this, it's a new program, and we're still trying to figure out the structure of this program. We are looking for 52 megawatts of reduction by 2018, and this is specific to network needs. So this is 2 networks in Brooklyn and 1 in Queens, and this is a noon to midnight peak. So obviously, this is a challenge that cannot be met by a single technology, and it's going to take a lot of creativity and from both customer side as well as behind and in front of the meter. So be happy to discuss that further, and look forward to your questions.
Great. Thanks, Jinjin. So last but not least, we're joined by Fred Lee. Fred is the Director of Legal and Business Development for the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation. Which means that Fred manages the legal affairs of the organization in addition to leading underwriting and execution of new transactions. So we've been talking a bit about the projects that get developed, but a key piece of that, of course, is where the money comes from. So with that, I'll turn it over to Fred to talk about the role of NYSEG in distributed energy resources in New York City.
Thanks, Dave. David and I used to work together. I used to be
full
EDC,
disclosure.
So I was his boss. Yeah. So he said he would take it easy on me today. So quickly on NYSEG, we are a nonprofit specialty finance corporation focused solely on clean energy financing. We were formed by the City of New York in 2011, so we've been in operation for 4 years, and we're fully independent, and we are a vendor to the City of New York through a consulting contract, and we are very closely aligned with the goals of New York City. And I'm going to get into an accelerator program that they've recently launched that we're partners on with the city on. So we work very closely again with the city and with also NYSERDA in a lot of our initiatives. So what do? We provide financing and technical expertise, that's engineering, to building owners, project developers, and vendors for energy efficiency, cogeneration, renewables, demand response projects in New York City buildings. And our goal in life is basically to provide financial solutions to get projects to completion. So we provide construction financing, we do incentive financing, we do unsecured, partially secured mortgage financing. We really try our best to accommodate the specific needs and circumstances of the borrowers that we engage with. And we do market rate lending, but we, I think, go above and beyond typical lenders in terms of our approach. Our deals have ranged in size from $50,000 to $6 million, and to date we have originated $50 million in total. We've done $50 million of total project costs in terms of financing, and that breaks down into 37% cogen, 20% energy efficiency, 3% clean fuel conversions, and then 40% is a combination of those technologies. So I think that's a good overview of who we are. If you want more information, I encourage you to go to our website, nyceec.com. And you can find out more information about us, and we also have some case studies on specific projects that we worked on. So if you want to do a deeper dive, I encourage you to go to the site. I just wanted to touch briefly on one initiative that we've recently launched with New York City. This is a retrofit accelerator. It's an energy and water retrofit accelerator, and this is really to advance Mayor de Blasio's 80 by 50 goals. It's a comprehensive program that combines targeted marketing and outreach with technical assistance to accelerate energy efficiency, water conservation, and clean energy retrofits. And so our role in that is to develop and implement a targeted retrofit strategy to assist the efforts of our partners within the accelerator. And what that really means for us is to continue the work that we've done. When I say work, it's really doing the deals and also having an eye on advancing the field of clean energy finance. But specifically, a couple of things that we're working on through the accelerator. We're beginning an initiative to try to lower transaction costs for financing, specifically focused on affordable housing, and also high performance building retrofit projects, and that includes passive house and net zero projects. And so we've already launched a pre-development fund for HPD as part of that initiative. And we're working with our partners to create a strategy for lowering transaction costs on the high performance side, and that's just getting underway. The other initiative I wanted to highlight is we're evaluating existing and potential new financing products for the New York City market, and that includes PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy. I think it's something that many of you are familiar with. It's a novel financing mechanism that has been successful in a couple of localities, including Connecticut, California. New York State has a program. There is state legislation that enables the city to do a PACE program, but it doesn't exist yet. And so the city is focused on understanding what it will take to implement a PACE program. So more to come on that. And just, I don't know if everyone knows what PACE is, but that's really, it's a mechanism where borrowers paying back whatever it's borrowed to do a retrofit through its tax bill. And what's appealing about that is it has priority in terms of the collateral over a mortgage. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks, Fred. So clearly there's a lot of activity going on in DER in New York City, but there's also, in my view, a lot of untapped opportunities. So I'd like to get the panel's view as to what is sort of holding back the acceleration or growth of DER in New York City. And in particular, if there was one thing that you could wave a magic wand and solve, what would that be? I'll let whoever wants to start first jump in.
I think my ultimate wish is to make permitting go. I think in an ideal Gingin world, you would apply and for a battery storage system, and then a month later you would start construction and everything is fine and we go along our way. Unfortunately, battery storage systems are new in term for peak shaving and load shedding. And I think for those who are really interested and who have not explored how to install those systems, please visit gridmarket.com, and then also start looking at the FDMY and DOB website. Look at the IRB process, Innovative Review Board process. We are, Canadason and NYSERDA is currently engaged with the FDMY and DOB in testing a series of mature battery storage systems to help develop pretty much the nation's first responders guide for firefighters. And you think that's what? I can't believe that doesn't exist. It's true. Unfortunately, that our firefighters and first responders do not have that information available to them, and that's something that we're hoping to mitigate as a first step to improving and fast tracking that permitting system process.
I guess quite predictably, I would probably say better grid integration with between the DER and the utility grids. Being able to unlock more of that value from the resource, having it, pairing PV with battery storage, that sort of idea to allow you to better use the energy. So if you're generating at times when you're not going to use it, you're going to be exporting it onto the grid. If you're able to store that and use it yourself or better support the grid at times and unlock more value from your resource. So distributed resources on the grid are good for generating energy and low carbon energy, but they also support grid operation if used in the right way. If you're generating your energy locally, there's less of it that has to come through the transmission and distribution system. If you can do that at the right times, you're going to help Gingin. You're going to have less peak demand if you can get your distributed energy resources to coincide with peak demand. So probably better cohesion between utilities needs and distributed energy resources, where on the grid these devices should be located, and being able to unlock the true value of these resources by having them support the operation of the grid for the benefit of everyone, and trying to target that. So there's technologies and there's means to do this. It's just maybe the policies around having that implemented are still to be developed.
I would echo Colin and Jinjin's point about lowering the cost of grid integration. That's looking at everything from greenhouse gas investment per greenhouse gas metric ton reduced. It's harder to make the case for renewables, and especially now. I mean, thanks to in part to NYSERDA grant we got from them, we're installing 6 megawatts. By April of next year, and these are large systems, and there's a significant cost to integrating these into Con Ed's grid, understandably, because it's these systems could meter a significant amount of electricity. It's very complex, and Con Ed needs visibility on that. But the costs of doing so are quite high, and that's obviously borne by each individual customer. And there must be a more cost competitive way to do that across the network to get some economy of scale. So renewables are a key part of our strategy, but fundamentally, if I could snap my fingers, it would be efficiency. There's so much efficiency left, so needing to shrink what we need. When we have the resource in place, they're more able to cover what these buildings are consuming.
So just on that point, I think you're right about efficiency, and I think a lot of it's just a sort of an education and knowledge issue that I think the city is trying to address as well as NYSERDA and Con Ed. If people understood sort of the economics and the value proposition, in most cases, not every case, but of doing a cogen project or doing some energy efficiency work, I think it's a no-brainer. But people just don't have the time or the resources to really dig in and understand that. So I think it's an education issue. I think if and that's part of what we try to do. We address this ignorance by putting our case studies on our website, and you see that for example, a project we did on Roosevelt Island. It's a 9-building large complex. They projected savings in I think the 20% range, and this was a cogen and energy efficiency project. And I think their savings projections are 50% less than what they're achieving in terms of actual savings. If people, I think, were more aware of that sort of success, they would be more focused on doing those types of projects.
Great. So the typical definition of DER includes behind-the-meter generation and storage. But as we've been talking about, there's also a role for energy efficiency and demand response in this, and that's something, of course, the PSC has recognized. But in thinking about the interplay between those those two approaches, what do you see as the opportunity for pairing energy efficiency and sort of more traditional, if you will, DER in terms of generation and storage? Because I think in particular in for example, one of the programs that Jinjin mentioned, the focus is on peak load reduction, and that has certainly infrastructure benefits in terms of just reducing what's the peak kW. But at the same time, from the city's perspective and thinking about our greenhouse gas goals, we're very interested, of course, in kWh reduction. What do you see as the sort of the intersection between those two objectives? Are they things that can be in conflict, or are they always complementary? How do you view that?
Sure, I'll take it. I think they're certainly complementary. I mean, I think ideally we would hit energy we would maximize energy efficiency in a building and then add distributed energy resources such as generation and storage. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's ultimately what we're driving towards from a portfolio standpoint. But yeah, I think that given that our goals are greenhouse gas reductions, what's missing in sort of our knowledge is what are the marginal greenhouse gas reductions of peak load shaving. I haven't seen good information on that. So how do we quantify what that actually does in terms of reducing the the carbon intensity of our operation, and also local emissions? What does that do for local emissions? So I think that's something we need to look into further.
I think pairing them together so that if you have the same goal of energy efficiency and DER to try and lower carbon emissions, then you, as much as you can, maximize your energy efficiency. And then if you have to use energy, you try as hard as possible to coincide that use with times of high renewable energy generation. So times of the day, having some automation and control to try and use power when the sun is shining or when the wind is blowing. And before all that, you ensure that you're using as little energy as you need, that you can fully maximize these resources when they're available, and then lower emissions from basically attacking it from two sides of the coin.
Great. Fred, as you mentioned, a big chunk of the projects that NYSEG has funded have involved multiple technologies. What's your view on how investors look at the sort of the interaction of multiple technologies in a project as opposed to it being just sort of a single technology that's being funded?
Well, I think a lot of the projects originate from an audit, which is typically a comprehensive assessment that includes renewables or cogen. So, you look at the entire picture, and typically you have, one bite at the apple to do a project. You're not going to do multiple projects just because it's, it just doesn't make sense logistically for a building to do, multiple projects year after year. So I think that's definitely a factor. But I think people, at least on the projects where you have multiple technologies, where you have the cogen and the efficiency, they do understand that, you want to size the system correctly, and you don't want something that's too, you want to sort of do the low-hanging fruit, which is the efficiency, and then now you sort of know what the load is of a building or buildings, and then you implement the cogen, and that seems to have been the mindset of at least several of the projects that we've encountered.
Great. For a lot of these types of projects, because they are new things, certainly in our experience developing, for example, our smart grid project, the Brooklyn Army Terminal, there really was no substitute for just trying to do the project, and then you learn what the barriers are pretty quickly. And that's, of course, something that takes time and it takes money. But I'm wondering what the potential is for looking elsewhere in terms of case studies. So, for those of you that are either aware of or have done projects outside of the 5 boroughs of New York City, are there lessons that you've learned that you think could be transferable? And this may make the most sense for Colin, given that you've done done projects in Europe. So I guess at a high level, maybe what's what could you learn from, say, islands off the coast of Scotland that would be applicable to the sort of New York City environment?
Yeah, I mean, other than whiskey distillery, the lessons, I guess, that it's trying to do something innovative, and the islands were at a stage where they had to have this done, so they had to just go ahead and come up with the technology. There was that forced innovation. Now that we've found out a new technology, a new alternative to these things, it's trying to adopt them in other areas, and so you have to learn a bit about the locations, different ways of running and operating the grid. So, as I said earlier, there are similarities, but there are also differences. You can look around the world, UK and Europe, Asia, and see the technologies that are being deployed for some of the use cases, and it's having a vision that you may encounter the same issues in the future, so not being short-sighted and seeing that one of the barriers we had initially was, oh, you've done it in an island system, we don't have islands, so that technology doesn't apply here. But indeed it actually does, because at the core of it, it's control and automation and integration between ability in the generation. So I would say if you look at projects across the world and with an open mind and try and not close them off to be specific just because they're in an area or they would apply to certain use cases, try and look at the technology and the value that it was driving and how it could be applied in New York City. So just because it's not an 8 million population city doesn't mean the technologies that are being developed in these places can't apply here and help New York meet its goals.
Jinjin, is there anything that you're aware of in terms of when Con Ed was developing the RFI for BQDM, sort of examples from elsewhere in the world where this sort of approach had been taken?
I don't think we were consciously drawing on examples from around the world, but I think as far as just most basic concept in energy efficiency, we're still really behind, right? I mean, I spent 9 years in consulting engineering, and it's still very much the standard, the delta T's, you know, in your systems, in your cooling and your heating. Something as common as condensing boilers, right? In our buildings, you put in a condensing boiler, but you're not maximizing the delta T, right? You're still designing the 20-degree delta T, 180 to 160. You're not realizing the full efficiency of that. I think really what we need to do is first address the efficiency issue. There's still so many low-hanging fruits, and then having lower flow and higher delta T, which reduces the fan power, the motor power. And, you know, in our demand management program, it really was a huge learning curve for us. We're constantly trying to engage with our customers and trying to understand what are your needs, right? We can't design a program that that's not going to appeal to the customer, right? We can throw money at them, but it's not going to speak to them or resonate with their needs. They're not going to look at our programs and try to take advantage of that incentive. So when we are, for the first time, launched a program that is challenging customers to look at their peak demand as well as energy efficiency and developing that bonus structure to get people to deep dive, right? You're not going to get 500 kW of reduction in one project when you're just looking at your lighting or you're just looking at your HVAC. You have to look at your entire building. And now it's a mentality of, okay, instead of just turning on everything like you normally do, and it's that education piece that Fred was talking about. Customers we need to engage them. They're smarter than we have been treating them, right? It's just like, okay, here's the money, you do this and then that. If we can challenge them to say, you have all these controls, you have all these advanced projects, let's think smartly in how your bill is structured. Let's think smartly in how you can reduce your peak demand without really, you know, compromising how your tenant comfort, right? How your building is running. You don't have to, you know, sacrifice comfort to your building or hold all your elevators, right? So I think what we're learning, not just internationally, but we're listening to our customers, and that's how we're learning for our RFIs and listening to developers and events like this.
Great. I think that the topic of customers, of course, is central to all of this because we work with different types of customers sort of that are ultimately the decision makers in this. And a lot of the programs have started from an approach of, you know, we have a program where we try to drive as much adoption. But I'd like to get your thoughts on how sort of customer pull could be a bigger factor. And I'm thinking an example just from a few weeks ago when Tesla launched their home energy storage product and had Elon Musk talking about this, you know, very sleekly designed box and you know, that looked sort of more like like an Apple product than sort of an industrial product. You know, that appears to have resulted in really significant sales and interest from customers who had not done energy audits or not gone through any of the types of programs that we've been discussing. Do you see that as sort of an example of an opportunity that could be more broadly applied, or is that just something that's really unique to sort of a Tesla type company?
Yes, yeah, it's the way that you package it. I think it's maybe if you try and if you don't look at the customer's needs and how they want to interact with the technology or their even understanding of technology and how it works. So there's the Apple, you mentioned Apple, there's things in an Apple iPhone that no one knows how to work it. You only use like 10% of it, but you like the look and feel of it. You know, it does what you want it to do because you've been told in a clear way that you can understand. So when you talk about utility and the grid and you talk to customers, you have to go from their understanding of how the grid operates. So a lot of outreach helps, a lot of programs where you get customers together and utility together to talk to their customers. In the UK, there's an annual conference where DG developers get together. It happens in 3 locations around the UK, and they talk to the utilities and the regulators in the room. So every year, the utilities have to come out with some new ways of interacting with their customers, or customer interaction is actually one of the things they're encouraged to do by the regulator, and they're actually rewarded for having good customer engagement. So that's something that has really helped in the UK between the developers of distributed generation and the utilities, just having these conferences and times to discuss with each other. So I guess first it was a lot of, oh, the utility, you're not doing this and you're a barrier, but now they're listening to their customers, they're engaging, and they're giving them what they want, like alternative to the traditional way of doing things.
I think the commercial industry is less gimmicky and more just about information, useful, actual engineering support and things, and helping them understand our systems. But for the residential space, we do recognize that they're more gimmicky and trying to, appeal to the gadgets that they have. And so we do have a few residential programs that were appealing to that. So we, Canada's and co-patent the Modlit, right? That's in our Cool MIC program, where you can plug your normal, dumb AC unit in the wall and it turns into something smart and you can control with your phone, right? So that kind of things we're definitely exploring in the cooling world. And room ACs is a huge issue for us. There's 6 billion of them in our territory, and it's a huge issue, and it's a big potential too.
So some of the types, especially these things that are marketed directly to consumers, I think about like the Nest thermostat or the Tesla Powerwall, are things that may be appealing to a segment of the population that tends to have some disposable income and that is educated on some of these matters and wants to have a shiny gadget. But I also like to think about this from an equity perspective, because as we're investing a mix of public and private money in DER, how do we ensure that the benefits are sort of flowing equally to the residents of a city like New York?
Equity is something we consider in all of our programs in terms of what projects we fund, in addition to cost competitive and resiliency, education, cost savings. But equity, targeting underserved neighborhoods and particularly social services agencies that we can support in their own way. They already have plans to upgrade a facility, and we can just provide additional funds to maximize energy performance there. So that's part of every decision that we make to serve the agencies facing and serving the public and the infrastructure in those underserved communities.
So a couple of things I think we've seen in our our project portfolio, an overrepresentation of low to moderate income buildings. So there's definitely a higher need for financing in that sector. And then on the accelerator, this is really a mostly city-funded initiative, and that's the de Blasio administration basically paying for the bills. And so, this is focused on energy and water, but through this kind of broader lens of equity, particularly affordable housing in New York City. So I think there's always going to be that kind of bias in that direction. It's definitely on the forefront, explicitly and implicitly for us. I think we see that there's a market there and a need there, so we definitely try to address it, and then the city is definitely doing its part to address it as well.
Great. At this point, I'd like to open the floor up to anyone who'd like to ask a question. So I know there are microphones throughout the table, and if you could, before you ask a question, just introduce yourself in terms of your name and affiliation. Then we'd like to get your questions now. Sure. Nick
Davis with Grid Market. More comment. general back and forth because we're very much on the ground doing a lot of this. And you mentioned the Tesla Powerwall is basically creating this marketing blip. I didn't think that that was going to really drive much traction, but what we did find was all of these REITs who we've been reaching out to through the grid market platform for the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months, a lot of them who had basically gone cold because their main drawback was the value of a square foot over pretty much anything else. They all started calling us. So, you know, they hear this marketing blip and they're like, all right, Elon Musk is talking about it. Now we want to do site walkthroughs. We want to squeeze into the DMP. So all of a sudden we have dozens of walkthroughs on the calendar with some of the biggest REITs in the world. And they're all of a sudden interested. And you know, if you create something that's familiar to them, a lot of the advanced technology might be a little scary, but you know, we're at one of the leading banks and they're like, their main comment was, is there a safety issue here with having even a lead acid battery in our facility? We're of course telling them, no, this stuff's everywhere. They don't believe it until we go up to the 7th floor and they have a whole room of flooded lead acid batteries serving as their UPS backups. And those are significantly more volatile than what's being proposed. So it's really remarkable. That changes the narrative of the conversation. That says, all right, now we're in a sprint to get this in so we can claim that money. This is something we're familiar with. And then they go on site and they see one of these things in a garage on 39th Street. They see something operational. And they're like, all right, this looks like my server room. This isn't alien to me anymore. This is something that's familiar, something I can wrap my hands around, and I'm understanding what it's doing. So we're seeing, even over the last few weeks, and hopefully there's still time in all these programs, over the last few weeks, we're just seeing massive interest. And you know, maybe once this all starts paying out, we'll on a couple bucks. But you know, things are starting to move. People are familiar and comfortable, and people realize that these assets are actually in their facilities now. They're in their data centers. They're in their server rooms. So this is technology that's going to be increasingly comfortable and increasingly adopted. And now they're finally starting to familiarize themselves with everything. Very positive, I think.
I'm Bob Lockney with Couch White. I wonder if the panel could comment on what the Public Service Commission is looking at with this reforming the energy vision. In the course of what the PSC is looking at, it seems like they're very much in favor of pushing distributed energy resources and providing incentives. And if that panel think that that will help to maybe jumpstart or accelerate growth of the stars in the city.
I would say that incentives are a huge driver for activity. So to the extent there are incentives, and you know, there's mixed messages coming out of the state on kind of what's going to be in the offing. I know their perspective is changing a little bit, but for DER, if that were the case, if there are increases in incentives for example, cogen, I think that activity would definitely increase. We've just seen so many instances where that's driven kind of activity, driven kind of the, you know, opportunism of a building owner or project developer to do a project, to just take advantage of a really, you know, juicy incentive.
I think since REV came out and since it specifically references to DERs and encouraging the and challenging the utilities to think differently from their standard business model, it certainly has not just engaged Con Edison in new discussions, but also the state. And I think that's really what's important in getting these barriers down, right? So I'm personally on 2 committees, you know, one led by CUNY. Erica is here. And she's back there. And they're developing a roadmap for solar storage for New York State. And then NYSERDA is developing a roadmap for energy storage in New York State. And I don't think these efforts would be so prominent if it weren't for REV. And so while maybe customers and end users are not seeing the impact of that, but certainly there is background work to help take down these barriers so that when the next wave of incentives do come out, when REV finally kind of the dust settles and a new structure comes out, that the customers and end users can take advantage of that and not have to be hit by barriers. So there's a lot of background work happening right now because of that. So certainly REV is making a difference in that perspective.
Tim Woodcock, Home Medicine. Thank you all for being here. My question is coming from there too. You may or may not know, but per Lawrence Livermore, 51% of the electricity generated or imported from Canada in this country is never used. It's wasted. So per REV, there's a couple of ideas that I've been playing with, one of which is ComEd in Chicago has recently petitioned their PUC to incur demand charges on the residential space, as well as the commercial space. This is pretty revolutionary if they're able to get it. But I've spoken to many members of Con Ed, and they've discussed that this is something that, maybe we should consider as well. It could be a better solution for an LMI. We're actually, without a demand charge on the residential space, we're seeing a subsidy for the commercial player itself. So that's something interesting. And then I just want to ask specifically, I think Jin and Colin, there's been a lot of talk of scrapping SCADA for DERMS or distributed energy resource management software as something for where we could incorporate real-time LMP, TOU, so we really know the price in real time. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on something like that. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll take that one. In terms of the demand charges for residential, I guess, if you were going to do that, you're going to have to look at the value of DER more than just energy generation. So if you're doing demand charges, you're looking at KW, peak demand. So if DER can avoid that, they should also be rewarded for it. So you have to monetize all of the benefits that DER are bringing, and that's one of the things that REV hopes to do, and maybe it doesn't need incentives, maybe there is just a market for these things that bring along an offer, like in ancillary services to the ISO DER, do something like that with distribution facilities. Then on your other point on the DERMS and new enterprise control systems, so a lot of new enterprise control systems coming out. We are obviously offering automation and control, so there's a lot of work to be done on how best to implement these systems so that we can have better management of DER, but a lot of it is coordinated towards having those DER, unlocking the true value of them in a way that helps everyone as well as the DER owner and get some of that benefit. So there is still a bit of work to be done on how that would happen, and creating a market at the distribution system level is not as straightforward as applying transmission ISO level markets and adopting them at the distribution system, where at one point there's way more nodes. The number of distributed generators is going to far beyond the number of generators connecting to the transmission network. We have to come up with new methods, look at what is in place, what works, what doesn't work, come up with new ways of adopting pricing at the distribution level, which isn't going to be straightforward or easy. It's going to take a lot of thought, a lot of head scratching. REV is starting to work on some of that just now, and I guess they're going to have to take steps to adopt things slowly, start to look at markets. What would a market be? Who would be the buyers? Who would be the sellers? What would they be buying and selling? And how could that facilitated at the distribution level? What new systems have to be adopted? What technology is out there that can be applied? But what are we going to have to innovate around? What's going to come along and unlock this? What's going to be the new shiny? Maybe Elon Musk will market it for us. I don't know. But the steps taken are we're beginning to take those steps and look at those things. But it's a journey we're going to have to go through and try and navigate and innovate around.
So we do have a group dedicated to SCADA, and I'm not in that group, so I can't really comment on specifics. But what I can say is that, per REV, the utilities are currently exploring a platform, whatever that might look like, that would allow the integration of all these DERs. And, at least I just look at it from the Con Edison perspective, our system is so complex, and SCADA is so entrenched into our systems. Any changes to our system is not going to be overnight, right? And I'm sure some of you guys know we issued our first battery RFP at our substation last year, and that will be our first system integrated battery storage system, and that's still going to run. It has to integrate with SCADA. So right now, as we're bringing these systems on, we have to find ways to kind of bridge that communication to, one, have that system run properly, and then also to be able to communicate to our systems. But as far as a platform, there's certainly a vision for it, and utilities are meeting regularly to come up what that system might look like and engaging vendors on what kind of solutions they might be able to provide to us. Of course, when you're talking about multiple utilities, that complexity to that, just together alone, that would be not even talking about the different systems that everybody have.
Hello, my name is Oliver Kohler. I'm with a company called Integrated Solar Technology, and I was wondering, have there been any projects where you've actually sides of buildings where, at least theoretically, you have something that's visible, something that produces clean energy, but also can reduce the building load, HVAC load, if it's put on certain parts of the building? Has there been any work in that direction?
All of our work is done in existing buildings, so we have not done a project to that extent. We've only done roof-based systems, but I believe the Department of Design and Construction, New York City's Department of Design and Construction, has done projects integrating BIPV, because they oversee the new construction, gut renovation of city buildings as well. But it's certainly we're totally technology application agnostic. We're looking for whatever is going to help us meet our reduction goals.
Hi, my name is Rachel Evestein. I work for Solar One on behalf of NYSERDA, and thanks to all the panelists. This is really great discussion. So, of course, we've seen the explosion of solar everywhere in New York City, but I'm wondering about where you see other technologies such as wind, and I know whenever I go out in Long Island, everyone's talking about geothermal. Do you think those technologies, or maybe other technologies, have a place in the new kind of energy landscape, either in the coming years or maybe even projected several years from now?
I mean, we technically can do renewable projects, but we haven't done any solar projects, and we don't see, we really have seen mostly established technologies. So I would say, one of the barriers is just sort of the way the exists, the buildings. It's difficult to do anything. Putting a turbine on top of a building sounds like a great idea, but it's really not. It doesn't work. so you don't. That's why you really don't see it.
Like smaller ones.
Maybe a smaller
offshore.
one, but you won't. Yeah, not a offshore. I guess that's something maybe the Green Bank be looking into, and not something that we would necessarily take on. It's, that's massive in terms of scale and cost.
There are a handful of geothermal installations across the city, including right in Times Square. The TKTS booth has a geothermal well there that they use for some sort of heating and cooling. And I know the Center for Architecture, the AIA building, does as well. But some of the new technologies certainly pose new challenges here, and I think EDC over the years has run a number of pilot programs looking at some of these. But I think that nothing has seen the growth that solar has at this point. And even some existing technologies, for example, solar thermal. Solar thermal is one of the oldest renewable technologies that there is. But back in sort of like 2010 to 2011, EDC did a pilot program where we helped several nonprofit organizations put solar thermal systems on the rooftop. And while the systems have functioned fairly well, for multiple reasons, they have not experienced the same sort of replication and growth across the city. Some of that has to do with how incentives have been designed, the fact that most NYSERDA programs were only eligible for, even the solar thermal programs initially were only eligible for people that were displacing electric hot water heat, which is not normal in New York City as opposed to some other parts of the state where we tend to be using gas or fuel oil. So I think that there certainly is some opportunities. In Sunset Park, the Sims recycling facility has a 100 kW wind turbine there, but it's pretty unique within the city. I don't know how many other opportunities there are for something like that.
Yeah, we looked into a ground mount, a 1 megawatt wind turbine at a city property, and there were challenges. There were a number of challenges. It was, there were noise issues, ice throw issues, as well as wind was coincident with night and winter when electricity was the cheapest. So it was very hard to make the case, and sort of that's where it ended. It's a great point, Dave, about solar thermal. There's a huge application for that. We're installing those on our firehouses because they have a large domestic hot water demand. One of the challenges with both that and geothermal is operation. They're just more sophisticated to operate, more hands-on than a PV system, and so it really requires skilled operators, and all these technologies do. Even efficiency, to run a building efficiently, you need a really hands-on, trained, and facility or building operator who has the tools that he or she needs to do their job.
In terms of the energy efficiency portion of it, geothermal is definitely on our radar. Energy efficiency programs are governed by DPS staff, and under staff we have the IAG group, and that's all the joint utilities, and certainly geothermal is one of those things that we're looking into. But the biggest problem is when we have these incentive programs that are ratepayer money, we have to justify it, and to justify that is cost benefit is great. You have to understand the savings, and for these newer technologies, geothermal, when you have to traditionally our energy efficiency are separate in few, right? You have electric and you have gas, right? So for geothermal, where you have both, you would be offsetting. It's a true energy efficiency and energy package, but programs, unfortunately, not just New York State, but other states are, I think Texas is the only one I'm aware of that recently successfully incorporated geothermal and turned their energy efficiency systems into an energy system where it's for BTU and not KW or therms, right? So when you have pockets of money that's coming from gas SPC or electric SPC, there's that challenge from the regulatory space. So I don't think it's a technology issue when it comes to some of these newer technologies, but it's really, we're not able to quantify the cost benefit and then also the economic space to be able to bring that to our programs the way they're structured.
I wanted to ask a question. You are pretty much familiar with New York City clean heat approach that was put in during Bloomberg administration a couple years ago, when there was a mandate for landlords to switch from fuel oil number 6 to lighter, cleaner fuel or natural gas. Due to the fact that that was a mandate, there was a huge explosion in conversion of the buildings from oil number 6 to cleaner oils as well as natural gas, and that's still going on because the deadline to finish that project is somewhere starting in 2016, and the landlords are going to be fined if they didn't do conversion. Well, based on that experience, my question to you is whether there is anything in legislation of administration of the city that that can actually accelerate adoption of distributed energy that could be thought of to be implemented in the future. Because my company is Excogen Energy, and we have a lot of experience talking to the landlords and midtown buildings running steam boilers on pretty dirty oil. They don't really see, sometimes it's hard to retrofit, and they don't see the incentives and savings given the current New York City real estate prices and costs are very economical. It's really cannot be driven by the market. And several of them told us, until you hit us on our pockets, we are not going to move. So that is something that I see as a kind of roadblock, because I'm sure technologies are out there, plentiful, different, all kinds of technologies that can be used. I think that on the implementation levels, we need to get to education, and we can't make it market, because if I show building savings of $100,000 a year in energy efficiency, that's really not market, because $100,000 is nothing in the budget of the building. You know, so I think we need to kind of come from the end that we need to incentivize, of course, but make some kind of little bit longer term program in order for this adoption to happen. That's my opinion. And the second thing I just want to say that, well, if we can't do it on that level, building per building, can we incentivize individuals, you know, tenants, corporations within the buildings to do something? And obviously one of these distributed technologies is a battery, where we can charge demand rates on the residential level or on commercial level, and that be the driving force, because I'm sure that plenty of corporations are more than willing to do this change, but they are stuck in a building where landlord doesn't care. So I think there are those two approaches could be kind of, you know, analyzed, and maybe some kind of solution could be brought to the table where the acceleration can actually happen, given the shortfall of 1,500 megawatts that we're supposed to do by 2016, closing down 2 gigawatt power plant. So that's my question to you. I don't know if you have, you know, if that can bring some discussion.
And I don't know if anyone from the mayor's office is here today, but I think sort of the first part of the question around mandates versus incentives, that's certainly a topic of ongoing debate, not just within the government, of course, but in the real estate community, as you'd of course expect. I know that the approach that was taken under Plan YC and the Greener Greater Buildings Plan was really some mandates around, you know, for example, certainly on the Clean Heat Initiative, but then also promoting and requiring a higher level of transparency and disclosure. So, you know, I don't know if the panel wants to comment or is able to comment on sort of that first part of the question, but I think that the sort of some of the broader questions are really about how do we engage people that are not necessarily empowered to make the decision themselves, whether thinking about renters. You know, most New York City individuals as well as businesses are in buildings that they don't ultimately own and control. So I guess are there opportunities to accelerate the adoption of DER given those constraints, ways of working directly with residents or building owners?
I mean, I don't really have any comment, obviously, with mandate versus incentive, but I just want to, I don't know if you're aware, but with the, I don't remember which local law, but they're requiring submetering of commercial buildings. That's certainly going to address some of that issue, tenant versus landlord, right? So right now, when tenants are not submetered, there is no real incentive because they don't see the savings if they do energy efficiency upgrades. And so with that new local law, I know that a lot of Class A buildings, when they retrofit, they are installing those submeters. And as we get more of the submetering in, both in the commercial and residential space, that's when we're able to address those individual occupants. Until then, I think our hands are pretty tied.
But one thing on the solar side of things that I think may help address this is that there's been some action at the state level on community solar initiatives, which would basically enable people to jointly own solar resources that are not on their own building. That's something that's had some success in other states. But basically, that would enable renters or people whose buildings just don't happen to be in a great spot for solar to invest in and receives the benefits of solar, even if it's not on their property per se. So I think there are some opportunities where it's a combination of sort of regulatory reform as well as the improving technology that can enable those types of approaches.
Hi, Dave Margolis, Bernard Nichols. Jinjin, you had mentioned there was a substation that you would put up energy storage. How big was that? You know, what made you pick that substation? And, you know, how do you see that scaling out if it really is a successful project?
So it's within so this is specifically in response to BQ. So we know within those networks, there were only, I think, 3 substations that we are, we have to look at to provide the load relief directly at those locations. And that's really limited by space restriction and just by the layout and space available. One substation came out, as a winner, but we did in the RFP provide footprints and area photos of all 3 substations to the bidders to see, whatever systems they want to propose. And it's for a 12 megawatt hour system, so 1 megawatt for 12 hours. Or we did ask them to provide us options to do 6 or, or 2 megawatts for 6 hours. As far as would this set a precedent, probably, if this is successful, and this is certainly new, as part of our, part of the reasoning behind this was we are encouraging customers to install these energy storage systems, and, we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is, saying, okay, let's put in one of these systems ourselves and see how it operates, and that way we can speak directly from experience when we're encouraging customers to adopt these type systems on their facilities.
Erica?
So getting back to Erica from Sustainable Community, getting back out there, totally with by the implementation. Software data.
So from the financing perspective, when you talk about data, I think more of a, I guess, an industry or financing industry question. Are you, as a lender, willing to underwrite savings, projected savings versus, a long history of actual savings? Most lenders are not. So that's something that we do, and we are, we do take seriously kind of the rigorousness of projected savings, but we're also keeping track of actual performance in most of our projects, and we hope to eventually build a data set that supports the projected data or the projections. So it's kind of an ongoing question, I think, from a financing perspective, and it won't really be sort of understood or accepted until there's probably more, and it's not just us, it's other entities who are doing a good job of keeping track of ongoing actual performance, particularly on energy efficiency. It's obviously easier to see that solar system or a cogen system is performing. It's harder to quantify the success of energy efficiency. So a bit of a challenge.
The data is absolutely critical to determining whether the project can pencil. What we're finding, though, is that properties are increasingly willing to share what was really a very private thing in the past. So a lot of REITs are giving us their data and pull it from customer care, pretty much determine whether that project meets the DMP criteria, whether peaks line up, and whether we can drop load to make this, the sub 4 or 5 year return that they're looking for. But that's something that's very easy in a place like California. They've got the green button, and you just pull everything, and that's the determinant. But again, what we're finding is financing is really not the barrier in this market. It's property manager education. So, to me, if you basically take half of the Green Bank's billion and invest that in actual property manager engagement and showing them that these resources are profitable and safe, that's more effective than just talking about how financing is an obstacle, which it really isn't, because you wave a flag with a 10% IRR in New York, you're going to get swarmed on by bankers. That's just the market that we're sitting in right now. So that said, there's an entirely untapped market here in New York. You know, if it's buildings that are 500 kW common load and up, we can pull that data, we can take a look. Luckily, they're mandating 250 and up now, so you're going to get those mid-cap buildings. You're going to be able to pull data and achieve actionable results from these things. Then, of course, there's the building stock between 0 and 250 that'll sit in the lurch for a while, but they're capturing more, and that's going to be, you're right, that's the linchpin right there.
I'd say on our experience from data, if we are installing any of our control systems, we have to study the feasibility of it first. For that, we need data from the network and how it operates, and historical data has been used by us to predict future viability of the solution. And in some cases, it doesn't exist. In fact, in a lot of cases, it doesn't exist because there isn't measurements on the system pulling this data back. So there's a question around not only having data, but what is the right data and what is the right amount of data, because if you were to monitor everything, it would be cost prohibitive. You would have to put measurements everywhere. Pulling back information from every customer on the network, then analyzing it will take a lot of processing power and is maybe too much for what you're trying to achieve. There's things where we can move data around and get it to the right places, not have to bring it back to the central location. So it's SCADA systems and how they would typically be set up to pull information from the entire grid every couple of minutes. Whether you need that, whether you can have more distributed control out with the customers and have automation where the data is being generated as opposed to transferring it around. And then also, depending on what your objectives are, so if you are looking at an individual customer and you're thinking about dropping their peak demand, you're actually dropping their peak demand to benefit the system peak. If that's your objective, the system peak, you don't really need to know what the customer's peak is. You want to know what the system peak is, when it occurs, for how long. You want to have that information flowing those customers to those control systems to say, okay, I am at my peak demand, but actually the system is nowhere near its peak demand, so there's no need for me to do anything. I'll save that energy and I'll use it when the system's at its peak demand, and I'll actually benefit myself and all the other customers on the grid. So it's about gathering the right amount of information, right amount of data, getting it to the right places around the system to make best use of it.
I think we have time just for one final question. Out of questions already? Well, in that case, let me just ask the panel if there's, in sort of summing up, there are a lot of topics that we covered today, from sort of permitting to financing to education and so forth. But I'd like to give each of you just a chance to make sort of a brief closing statement, as formal or informal as you'd like. But basically, what you hope that that those of us here today sort of walk away with in terms of the opportunities and the challenges ahead for DER. Yeah.
I mean, DER is going to be fundamental to achieving, an 80% reduction. DER is as it exists today, tomorrow, and way beyond. So REV is pushing us in that direction. City policies are pushing us in that direction. But I think it's important somehow to take the conversation out of such an informed group and get it to the world. DCAS isn't the best at that because we face other agencies. We're very internally facing. So we rely on all of you to tell us what's going on and help us get the good word out about what the city is doing and educate building owners, tenants, and everyone so they can be a part of this as well.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of opportunities for DER, and I think one of the key things is to have more cross-involvement, having multiple groups of people, not having just individual customers focusing on their own needs, trying to have customers come together, so community solar, schemes like that, to have groups of customers working with each other and also working with the utility to provide the best solutions. And I think if we start to do more of that, then we'll get to the objectives that we're trying to achieve.
I do remember I have a message to deliver for BQDM. So for those who are interested in BQ and have been curious in the RFI process and all those things, so with the how we're addressing the demand its phase, right? So our first 9 megawatts that we need to meet in 2016, we're pretty much piggybacking off of our existing programs and trying to do a deeper dive in multifamily and SBDI space. As far as the RFI piece of it, it is a rolling basis. So if you have a good solution and you have a customer that is interested, every proposal is ranked. They're ranked based on flexibility of the asset, cost, so cost per KW. They're ranked by duration, and so the block hour, what you're offering in your proposal, anywhere between noon to midnight and for how long. So when you're submitting your proposal, it's not over, and as detailed as you can be in terms of the block and the cost and your type of solution, you know, you definitely have a very good chance. As far as how much our programs are going to be paying toward your solution, that has not been determined, but everything is possible. So if your solution is good and you have a customer base in those networks, and if you're not sure what zip codes fall into that, definitely go into our BQDM website. And certainly we're challenging people to be innovative and to give us detailed proposals.
So I'll just echo what Emily said. I think education is key. And I guess the other thing is, short of a mandate to do clean energy retrofits, I think incentives, some level of incentive is important. So to whoever's listening, I think that should continue. I think it really has driven a lot of the work that we've seen.
Great. Well, in the spirit of education and information sharing, we are going to have some time now for more informal networking, and I believe most of the panelists will be around. But I really want to thank everyone for coming, and especially also thanks to the EDC and AGRION teams for organizing this, especially Jason Good, Lara Kraushore, and Jillian and Nick from AGRION. But please join me in thanking our panel for this morning. Thank you.
AGRION.